I had to drive across town one Friday to deliver some high-priority files from my precinct to police headquarters. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been stuck at a desk because of a shooting my partner and I had been involved in. It was a completely legitimate shoot. We stopped a perp coming out of a crack house, and he aimed his gun at us. It wasn't even me who shot him. It was Jim. Nonetheless, we were both on desk duty until IAD finished their investigation. I was bored stiff. Since there wasn't much for me to do, I decided to stop by my house on the way. Helen had cooked a fantastic brisket for dinner the night before, and I figured I'd make some of the leftovers into a sandwich for lunch. It was only a couple of blocks out of my way, and I knew no one at the precinct would care how long I took on my errand. Driving slowly up my street, I pulled over opposite Mrs. Ferguson's house to admire her flower garden. She worked on it 8 months of the year, and it was always spectacular. As I was about to drive the last 50 yards to my house, I glanced up and, to my surprise, saw a man coming out of my front door. It was Mark Monty, a guy who lived around the corner. Some sort of computer whiz who worked from home. What the hell was he doing coming out of my house at 11:30 in the morning? I watched as he scurried around the corner and out of sight. Then I pulled up in front of my house and went inside. The house was quiet, but I thought I heard the shower upstairs. Climbing the stairs and walking into my bedroom, I got a nasty shock. A very nasty shock. The bed was totally destroyed. Pillows, sheets, and blankets everywhere. There was a big wet spot in the middle, and the room smelled like sex. It was all too obvious what Mark Monty had been doing in my house. The shower was running in the bathroom, and I could hear Helen singing to herself, as she usually did when she was feeling good. "Son of a witch," I muttered, feeling the anger rise and threatened to overwhelm my utter and complete amazement. My wife was having sex with somebody else, some neighbor, behind my back. Helen and I had been married for 24 years, and I thought we were pretty happy. We met when I was still at the police academy. She was one of the assistant caterers at my cousin's wedding, and the cutest girl I had ever seen. Short, kind of pretty, not a knockout, but with a fantastic figure. I managed to flirt with her enough to get her phone number, and we dated for about a year before we got married. In almost every way, our marriage had been terrific. I worked for the department, and she stayed in the catering business, doing a lot of freelance work for a company run by a high school friend. Her flexible schedule allowed her to be an involved mother to our 2 daughters, Linda and Veronica. Linda was now out of college and working in Chicago. Veronica was a junior at Kenyon. They were terrific kids, and Helen had been a wonderful mother to them. Helen and I were devoted to one another. We shared the same values, cared about family in the same way, and enjoyed each other's company. When we met other married couples who were obviously bored with one another, we'd smile smugly at each other. After 2 decades together, we still had fun and never ran out of things to talk about. I felt pretty damn lucky. Except for one thing. That one thing was sex. Helen was stacked and very sexy. I'll never forget my excitement the first time I got to see her naked after several months of dating. But she just wasn't a very sexual person. After our courtship and the first few months of marriage, I quickly discovered to my dismay that sex about every 10 days or 2 weeks was plenty for her. It was a far cry from the 3 to 4 times a week that we began our marriage with, and I wasn't slow to complain about it. Over the years, we struggled with this issue more than any other. We even saw a marriage counselor for a while when the girls were little. After many years of frustration and unhappiness, I eventually came to understand that my wife really did love me. Her lack of interest in sex with me wasn't personal. She just didn't have much libido. The counselor helped me learn not to get so angry and helped Helen see that she needed to make more of an effort. So, once every 10 days became perhaps once a week, sometimes twice if I could talk her into it. I had high hopes that once the girls left for college and we had more free time, no driving them to voice lessons, tennis practice, dances, or friends' houses, things might get better. But they never did. What made it even harder to take was that when we did have sex, It was often a frustrating quickie. I longed to take my time, to kiss and caress Helen, to lavish attention on her beautiful body, to touch and kiss her all over. But most of the time, she simply wouldn't let me. She'd cross her arms over her body protectively and say, "Not tonight, honey, can't we just do it?" And so, with a sigh, I'd get out the KY jelly, and we'd have rushed, passionless sex. Not that I didn't like sex, but it seemed like no more than once every other month that we'd take our time, and she'd let me touch her. Aren't women supposed to be the ones who want more foreplay? Time after time, we had sex without my ever getting my hands on her breasts or down between her legs at all. Imagine how it feels to go 3 months at a time without getting to touch your wife's body. And forget oral sex. I was happy to go down on her, and I did from time to time despite her lack of enthusiasm for it. But in 25 years, she'd only given me oral sex 3 times, for about 30 seconds each. You may be thinking, what a cold-hearted woman. Why don't you dump her? But the fact is, Helen loves me, and I love her. She makes it clear every day in a million little ways how much I mean to her and how much she values me. We looked forward to growing old together. She just wasn't into sex, and over the years, with the help of my trusty right hand, I'd learned to deal with it. Which is why, as I stumbled down the stairs and back out the front door, I was as stunned as I was furious. Not only did I know Helen loved me, and not only did I have total confidence in her faithfulness, she just wasn't interested enough in sex to ever have an affair. So what the hell was going on? It took me no more than 3 minutes to get to Mark Monty's house and ring his doorbell. When the door opened a few inches, and he peered out at me uncertainly, saying, Hi, Rob. What are you?" I slammed the door hard into him, knocking him to the floor. Closing the door behind me, I picked him up and kneed him hard in the groin, sending him to the floor again, gasping and wheezing. I pulled him to his feet once more, relishing the sight of his face, pale and terrified. He couldn't even get a word out. Holding him by the shirt collar with my left hand, I smacked him repeatedly in the face, being careful to inflict plenty of pain without breaking my hand. I topped it off with a final punch straight to the center of his nose, relishing the crunching sound and the spurting blood. I tossed Mark onto his living room sofa, watching him gasp for breath. Putting my hand gently around his neck, I said, "Listen carefully, you little scum. I know just where you've been and what you've been up to this morning, and I'm about an inch from just shooting you and burying your body in the backyard." He didn't speak, just looked at me with terror in his eyes. "Now you're going to tell me everything I want to know. Answer every question I ask you. Then you're going to clean yourself up and go on with your life, and you are never, ever going to talk to Helen again. Am I speaking clearly enough for you?" I tightened my grip on his neck just a little to make sure I had his attention. He nodded frantically. Yes, Rob, I get it," he said in a quavering voice. He was totally cowed. I let go of him and got him started talking, making it clear that he damn well better tell me all of it. No leaving things out or minimizing what they did. And he spilled it all. He and Helen had been screwing for more than 2 months. To my astonishment, he said that she had come onto him at a July 4th neighborhood party. She flirted with him heavily whenever other people weren't in sight. 3 days later, she called him mid-morning and asked if he could come over to help her move a filing cabinet. When he arrived, she was wearing nothing but a short bathrobe. She greeted him at the door with words of thanks and a big kiss. While kissing him, she wrapped herself around him and slid her hand down to caress his crotch through his pants, before he had time to say much more than, "Are you sure we should be doing this?" They were in our bedroom. Her robe was off, and he was staring at her gorgeous body. She yanked his clothes off and had sex with him for the better part of 2 hours. I made him tell me all about what they did that first time, and after that, I was flabbergasted. She was loud and vocal, and she came at least once every time they had sex. Mark said he asked her several times, "Are you sure this is all right? What about Rob?" I had no idea if that was true, but he insisted that she said she could keep it a secret from me. Since that first time, they'd been getting together a couple of times a week, either in my bedroom or at Mark's house. She even tied him to his bedpost once, and he said she went absolutely crazy when he ate her while she couldn't move. This morning, he said, when I got to the house, she opened the door wearing just a lacy black bra and some pearls. Nothing else. We went upstairs, and while we did it, she was moaning and yelling. Then we did it with her on her hands and knees. After that, she helped me until I was hard again, and we screwed a second time with her riding me. When I'd heard it all, I just sat back in utter disbelief. The woman I thought I'd been married to for 24 years, or no relation whatsoever to the one who'd been screwing Mark so enthusiastically ever since the summer. One final question, then you can go clean yourself up. I can't believe you've been the first guy she's screwed around with like this. Did she tell you anything about anyone else? He didn't even hesitate. By now, he was thoroughly broken. She made it sound like there had been a few guys before me, but she only mentioned one of them. Joe, something. Auberman or older man. He's a fireman. She said he broke it off because his wife was starting to get suspicious. Joe, older man. He and Stephanie had been our good friends ever since their girls and ours were 5 years old. That scumbag. That son of a witch. Both Helen and I were probably lucky that I had the afternoon to calm down a little and get myself under control. Helen was lucky because I might have killed her. I was lucky because I would have gone to jail for a very long time. By the time I got home for dinner, I had my fury under wraps. Helen was as cheerful and affectionate as ever. We had a delicious dinner, chatting about the usual things, how the kids were doing, what catering gig she had coming up, how boring my desk job was. Amazingly enough, I was able to put on a normal face and hide my simmering rage. She was in bed watching a rerun of CSI when I slid in next to her. Of course, the bedroom had been totally put back together, clean sheets and all. I leaned over to kiss her cheek and reached my hand up under her nightie to stroke her thigh. She looked at me wearily and said, "Not tonight, sweetie, okay? I'm kind of tired. How about if we just watch a little TV together?" Usually, that was enough to get me to back off, perhaps with a disappointed sigh. Not tonight. I kept moving my hand up and said, "No, I really need you tonight, babe. Come on, you'll like it." "Rob," she said in an annoyed tone, "I don't want to. It's only 9:30. You can't be that tired." She looked at my face, as if trying to gauge how determined I was. She knew me pretty well, and she must have realized that I wasn't going to give up. "All right, Rob, if you insist," she said, this time in her most put-upon tone, trying to play the guilt card. But I ignored it. She pulled off her nightie and reached into the drawer for the key. "How about if we just touch and hug a little first?" I asked. "No, baby, let's just do it." As I pushed my boxers off, she grabbed me none too lovingly and covered it with the greasy lube. "How about doggy tonight?" I asked. With a displeased look, she replied, "No, honey, you know I don't like that. Come on, just take me." Without further words, I climbed aboard and slid gently into her, despite everything. All my rage and hurt. She felt good. I stroked smoothly in and out of her, enjoying the sensations, feeling her arms resting lightly on my back. She was unresisting but passive, apparently determined to be a boring partner. I stopped worrying about her and simply used her for my pleasure. I didn't bother trying to kiss her or stroke her body, knowing that she'd fight me. Instead, I took my time and worked up slowly to a very strong, very satisfying climax. When I was finished, I lay on top of Helen for a couple of minutes, holding my weight off her with my elbows, until she tried to wriggle out from beneath me. "Come on, baby, let me go clean up." "Not yet, Helen." I raised up to look at her face and spoke in my friendliest voice. "How about if you use your mouth on me, and when I'm ready, we can go again?" Her face took on a look of intense distaste. "No, Rob. You know I don't like that. How could you ask me to do that?" Still looking right at her, I said gently, "How about if you just pretend I'm Mark Monty?" Her whole body jerked in shock. She gave out an involuntary gasp, and she stared at me, wide-eyed. I'd never seen her face look like that in all our years together. Without another word, I slid up her body until I was kneeling over her. I pointed her in the direction, and she did what she was asked to do. Once I was satisfied with her efforts, I told her to turn around. Giving me another frightened look, she turned onto her hands and knees. I kneeled behind her, used my fingers to find the way, and slid inside her. It had probably been 2 years or more since I'd screwed her in this position, and I was going to enjoy every moment of it. As before, I took my time. I wasn't making love to the wife I loved. I was drilling her for the pure, selfish pleasure of it. Helen pressed her face into a pillow. I ignored all her emotions. I wondered, oddly, if she'd be sore the next day, but I didn't much care. When I came out 15 minutes later, drying my hair with a towel, Helen was once again sitting up in bed. She'd straightened up the bed, put her nightie back on, and brushed her hair. I could tell she'd been crying. She looked at me sorrowfully. "Rob, I'm so—" she began in a faltering voice. But I cut her off. "Me first, Helen." I was silent for a few seconds, just looking at her coldly. "I stopped by the house today before lunchtime and saw Mark Monty walk out the door. Then I came upstairs and heard you in the shower, and I saw the bedroom. So I hope you won't insult my intelligence with any lies about how I misunderstood the situation." "All right." Her head was down, and I could see she was blushing. She nodded without speaking. "I don't know if there's any chance of our marriage surviving this," she gasped, her head jerking up as she stared at me in horror. "But if there is, it's going to begin with you telling me everything, the complete truth. Do you understand me?" Helen nodded again and started to cry. "I'm so sorry, Rob. I can't believe I've done such an awful thing." She stopped for a minute as her sobs got the better of her. "All I want is for you to give me another chance. I'll tell you everything, but please promise you won't hate me." "Okay," I said. "Tell me the whole story. You and that scum. What, where, when, how long, how often, and why." She cried a little longer, then wiped her face. I never even paid attention to him until the July 4th picnic. Then it seemed like he was always around, getting me another drink or a hot dog, being friendly. A couple of times, when you weren't around, he got kind of flirty, leering at my boobs and even stroking my back. But that was a couple of months ago, and I forgot all about it. She paused, breathing unevenly, until last week, when he called and asked if he could come over to get help with some recipe he was making, a special dinner for his new girlfriend. So he came over, and we went through the recipe. I explained some things to him, and he was very grateful. We had a cup of coffee, and then I started to feel funny. Before I knew it, he carried me upstairs, taken my clothes off, and started to have sex with me. She stopped as a fresh bout of tears interrupted her. I was feeling all foggy, and I couldn't tell why this was happening or why he didn't stop when I said no. He did it 2 or 3 times, and even made me suck him. When he was done with me and getting dressed, he told me that he put something in the coffee. I think it was ecstasy, and he showed me his digital camera. He took pictures of him and me, Rob, of us doing it, and he said I had to keep seeing him, or he'd make sure that you and all your friends at the precinct got a copy of those pictures. Rob, I didn't know what to do. I listened without expression. I was almost certain she was telling me a bunch of inventive lies, but I was going to hear her out. She had no idea I'd already spoken to Mark. He called last week and said he was coming over again today at 10:30 a.m. and that I'd better be ready for him. I was terrified about the pictures, so I let him. He came over, and we did it again. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I'm so sorry, Rob. I was so afraid and confused. I didn't know what else to do. I sighed. Helen, why on earth didn't you tell me after the first time? Don't you know we could have had your blood tested for drugs and then had him arrested for raping you? She looked down. I can see that now. I guess I wasn't thinking clearly. I was just terrified about what you would do to me. And to him. Oh, Rob, I was so afraid and so confused. She started to cry again. I'm so sorry, baby. What a nice tale, I thought to myself. Highly unlikely, yet not completely out of the question. If you could believe that Mark Monty would be dumb enough to drug and take advantage of a policeman's wife. But the story he told me when I'd beaten the crap out of him seemed far more believable, even though it contradicted everything I thought I knew about my wife. Then there was the most damning thing of all. The sound of Helen happily singing in the shower only minutes after Monty had supposedly forced her to have sex with him again. I thought some more, gazing out the window, listening to Helen as she sniffled and wiped her eyes. You've been really stupid, Helen. I would have thought you'd trust me more than that after 25 years together. She looked at me meekly and said again, I'm so sorry, Rob. I'm going to think about how to handle this, and it may take me a few days. In the meantime, don't talk to Mark again, or anyone, about this. All right. All right, she agreed, suddenly full of hope. Please, Rob, don't do anything that would get you in trouble. I leaned forward, looking intently at her face. Helen, please tell me the truth now. Is this the only time in our marriage you've had sex with anyone else? She tried to look back at me, but I saw her eyes dart briefly away from mine before returning. I'd interrogated a lot of suspects in my life, and I pretty much knew what that meant. There's been no one, honey. No one but you. Until Mark. She broke into tears again and didn't bother to finish the sentence. The obvious lie enraged me all over again. I got up and started pacing around the bedroom. In case you can't tell, my dear wife, I'm not exactly too happy with you right now. You're sleeping in the guest room tonight, so take your things and get out of here. Rob, she gasped. Did you not understand me? I said more forcefully. I'm done talking with you tonight. Now get the hell out of here. But baby, she began. Get out. I yelled, and she scrambled to grab her bathrobe and left the bedroom. I settled down in bed to watch a football game for an hour, then went to sleep. I was surprised that I actually slept well, despite not having Helen by my side as I usually did. I guess draining my balls a couple of times must have helped. When I got downstairs, I could smell the coffee brewing. When I came into the kitchen, I saw that Helen had gone all out with breakfast. There were pancakes, sausages, scrambled eggs, even freshly squeezed orange juice. Helen was standing at the counter, pouring my coffee. She looked worn and frightened. Good morning, sweetie, she said timidly, handing me the cup. Hello, Helen, I said neutrally. This looks like a nice breakfast. We ate together, talking about safe subjects, and I watched as Helen gradually relaxed a little. When I was full, I slid my chair back from the table and stood up. There was one way to find out the truth about all this, and I wasted no time in getting to it. I told Helen I needed some time to myself, and after a quick stop in my basement workshop, I drove straight over to Joe Olderman's house. He was just walking toward his front door with the mail as I pulled up. I asked him to join me for half an hour to check out a new car I was thinking of buying, and off we went. I drove out toward Forbes Avenue where the car dealerships were, but I pulled off onto a quiet side road and into a sheltered parking lot behind a soccer field. Joe had been gazing idly out the window, but now he turned to me in confusion. Rob, why are we? What the hell? I was holding my service revolver 6 inches from his face. You son of a bitch, I said through gritted teeth. We've been friends for more than 15 years, but that didn't stop you from screwing Helen, did it? His face went white, and he leaned back as far from me as he could. Rob, what are you? I know what you did. you prick. I confronted Helen, and she told me the whole damn story. I'm about 1 inch from putting 3 bullets in your head and burying you where you'll never be found again. He caved. I could see it in his face. All in an instant, he figured if Helen had already told me, what was the point of trying to deny it? Instead, he frantically tried to cover himself. Rob, I swear it wasn't my fault. She came on to me, I swear. He repeated over and over. I kept telling her we were friends. It wasn't right. But she wouldn't leave me alone. I lowered the barrel a bit away from his face and watched him take a deep breath. He was sweating, and his eyes were terrified. Tell me the whole story, you bastard. Very slowly, very carefully, and don't leave out a single thing. Because if it doesn't match exactly with what Helen told me, I'll shoot your cheating ass and make it look like an accident. He was only too eager to talk, eager to do anything that would keep me from following through on my threat. And the story he told was a lot like Mark's. Helen had been the aggressor. Our 2 families spent a lot of time together, and about a year earlier, Helen had taken the casual flirting that always went on between her and Joe up several notches. She'd even started grabbing his crotch or putting his hand on her chest when no one was looking. Finally, she called and propositioned him. While he refused her at first, or so he said, she kept after him, and he finally gave in. Rob, he said wearily, you wanted everything, so I'm going to tell you. Just don't shoot me, okay? I nodded, and he went on. She was the hottest woman I've ever been with. She loved to go down on me, especially after we'd done it. And she was always trying to get me up for another round. She almost always wanted to do it doggy style, and a few times she had me tie her to the bed. She was always so wild. Well, I guess you know, the way she talks, all the dirty things she says, like, do me harder, and all that. He was still looking nervously at my gun. How long did it go on? I growled. About 8 months. We'd see each other once or twice a week. I was always terrified you'd find out. Then Stephanie started to get really suspicious, like somehow she got the idea in her head that I was stepping out on her. I finally convinced Helen we had to stop. That was last June. How did she take it? She was annoyed, but she agreed with me because she didn't want Stephanie to know. She even joked to me, well, I guess I'll just have to find somebody to replace you, Joe. Did you ever ask her why she was cheating on me? Yeah, a bunch of times. Even at the beginning, before we started, I asked her why she wanted to do this. What did she say? Nothing that made much sense, just that she loved you, that you were a great guy, but she needed something extra, that this was more exciting and fulfilling. He hesitated. I have to admit, it was the best sex I ever had. Do you think you were her first affair? No. She mentioned a couple of other guys she'd been with. I didn't know any of them. I think one was a client she met while catering a party or something. I sat back and looked at him. He looked away, out the window. Finally, I said, you really are a piece of crap, you know that. I don't care how hard she came onto you. There was only one right thing to do, and you did the opposite. He hung his head, now looking at me, pleading silently. I figured he was secretly jumping for joy at the thought that I wasn't going to shoot him. Our friendship is over, Joe. Get out of the car. His mouth opened as if to argue, but the look on my face made him think better of it. Silently, he climbed out of the car and walked several steps away. Without another word, I turned the car around and drove back to town. I went straight back to Joe and Stephanie's house and was lucky to find Stephanie at home. She answered the door with a puzzled expression. Hi, Rob, she said, peering around me to look at the empty car. Were you and Joe together just now? Yeah, but something came up. Listen, can we talk for a few minutes? Still confused, she led me into the kitchen, where we sat down with cups of coffee. Steph, we've been friends a long time, and there's no good way to say this. Joe and Helen had an affair. She stared at me, her face frozen in disbelief. Finally, she shook her head. Rob, I could almost believe you if you said Joe and someone else. I had a feeling last spring that something was going on. But Helen? No way. I pulled out the mini recorder I'd stuck in my shirt pocket before leaving the house. Without saying another word, I rewound it and pressed play. We sat in silence, listening together to my whole conversation with Joe. Several times I wanted to cry, and I knew the tears would come later, but I kept myself under control. I watched Steph as her face hardened, her lips drawing tight in an angry frown. I figured her and Joe's marriage was probably as dead as mine was. When the tape was finished, we sat without speaking for a few minutes. Finally, I asked her, "Does any of this make sense to you?" "Not really, Rob. For so many years, the four of us have just been friends, you know. And we've always kidded around a little. A few times, I remember you pinched my butt or leered at my boobs in a bathing suit, but it was always harmless, and we all knew that. But this, like I said, Joe was acting strange enough last spring that it's easy to believe he was screwing around on me. But Helen, she's the absolute last person on earth I would have guessed he was doing it with." She looked at me suddenly, suspiciously. "Jesus, Rob, you didn't come over here to hit on me, did you? A little revenge sex or something?" "Christ, Steph," I said, recoiling in disgust. "I thought you knew me better than that. We've been friends a long time. You know I care for you. Do you really think I'm that big of an asshole?" She started to cry. "I'm sorry, Rob. I guess I'm kind of a mess right now. Not thinking too straight. It's hard to have a very good opinion of men, if you see what I mean. Please, Steph, remember that you and I are the victims here. Of course, you're a beautiful woman, and you know I'm attracted to you, but that's not what this is about. I needed you to know what a scumbag your husband is. I'm going to throw Helen's sorry ass out of my house, and if there's any way I can help you deal with Joe, I'll be happy to do it. I wanted you to know the truth, and to know that I'm on your side. That's the only reason I'm here. Believe me." Still crying, she came over and sat on my lap right there in the kitchen. She put her arms around me, her head on my shoulder, and sobbed. After a few minutes, we were both crying. We probably sat like that for half an hour. It's nearly 6 hours to Chicago, and I had plenty of time on my way to think. I simply could not imagine a more complete betrayal than what Helen had done to me. She had obviously had a series of lovers, at least some of whom she had taken the lead in seducing. Her affairs had gone on for weeks or months. Above all, topping everything else, was that she had been wildly, openly sexual with these other men. All the inhibitions in her sex life with me, the reluctance to try anything new, the refusals even to let me touch and caress her before we screwed. I had lived with those, suffered them, and endured them for years. At the same time, she'd been an enthusiastic slut with Mark, with Joe, and obviously with some other guys as well. I didn't know exactly how I was going to play it, but as I walked out of Stephanie's house, there were two things on my mind. The first was that my marriage was over, and Helen would be pretty damn sorry for what she did. The second was that I had to talk to my daughters first. I reached Linda by cell phone, and she was delighted I was coming for a surprise visit. We ate at a diner around the corner from her apartment. She chatted with me for a few minutes about her new job and the ups and downs of life with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Chad. Then she said, "Okay, Dad, what gives? It's great to see you, but I know you didn't drive all the way up here for no particular reason. And you've been on edge ever since you got here, like you've had 4 too many cups of coffee this morning." I leaned forward and said quietly, "Sweetheart, you needed to hear this from me first. Your mom and I are splitting up. I found out she's been having affairs behind my back with more than one man. It's been going on for a couple of years at least." The next couple of hours were pretty rough. Linda absolutely didn't believe me, and I had a tough job persuading her that I was certain about Helen's cheating, while at the same time sparing my daughter the most damning details of what I knew. When we were back in Linda's apartment, and she'd finally come to believe the truth of what I was saying, She cried and cried. I could feel her pain at seeing the illusion of her parents' secure relationship coming apart, and I cried with her for a long time. This seemed to be my day for tears. I slept on Linda's couch, and when I left the next morning, I asked her to do something for me. First, please don't talk to your mom for a couple of days, or until she calls you. I need to go see Veronica today, and then get back home and get the divorce started. After that, whatever relationship you want to have with her is between the two of you. You know your mom adores you, and I don't think she was ever less than a loving mother to you and Ronnie. What she did to me, not to you, sweetie. I got to Kenyon around 9:00 p.m. on Sunday night, and my visit with Veronica was a lot like the one with Linda. Painful, full of tears, full of questions that could be asked but not answered. I left for home early on Monday morning. My cell phone had been off since I left town, and I turned it on now to let the precinct captain know I was taking a personal day. There were 11 messages from Helen, ranging from tearful and apologetic to increasingly worried, even frantic. I deleted them and kept driving, working out in my mind how to play the final scene of our marriage. It just killed me. A marriage that I'd put my whole heart into, that I'd looked forward to enjoying right until the end of my days. Gone. Destroyed. Shattered. And for what? So my wife could have some hot sex and explore the sexual side of herself that she'd never managed to reveal to me. I made a call to a PBA lawyer I knew and got a recommendation for someone to handle my divorce. When I reached town, I went straight to the guy's office, spent an hour with him, shared Joe's tape, and got him started on the paperwork. The girls were both out of the house, so there weren't going to be custody or support issues. I wanted the house, and if Helen fought me about it, I'd do my best to publicly humiliate her. Beyond that, I didn't much care. When I drove by the house around 4:00 p.m., Helen's car was nowhere to be seen. Good, I thought. I put mine in the garage, went inside, and called a 24-hour locksmith service. By 6:00 p.m., the locks had been changed, and I was ready. When Helen returned home, I heard her annoyance and frustration when her key didn't open the front door. She rang the bell insistently, and I opened the door silently, watching her face shift from irritation to an affectionate, nervous look. "Rob, thank God you're back. Where have you been for 2 days? I've been worried sick. Why didn't you call?" I ignored her questions. "Come in, Helen. Please, sit down in the living room," I said in a neutral voice. She tried to give me a hug, but I stepped back, avoiding her touch, and walked into the living room. She followed, her confusion apparent. "Rob, honey, what's going on?" Her voice was a little shaky, her eyes wide with worry. Without replying, I pointed to the couch, and she sat, never taking her eyes off me. I stood across from her, gazing at the troubled face of the woman I had loved so much for so many years. I waited, letting the silence grow heavy before I spoke. "Helen, you know that I would never hit you or hurt you physically in any way. You are a woman. And moreover, I used to love you with all my heart." She gasped. "Rob, used to? I don't." "Shut up," I yelled, cutting her off. "I won't hit you, but that doesn't mean I don't want to right now. Just shut your lying, cheating mouth and listen to me." "Rob, please," she started. "Quiet, Helen," I snapped. "I won't tell you again." By now, she was pale with fear and worry. I could see her hands trembling in her lap. "We're going to have this conversation nice and civilized," I continued. "And then you're going to go. I don't know where you're going to go, and I don't particularly care. This marriage is over. Our life together is over." She gasped, then started to speak, but the look I gave her stopped her cold. "You have cheated on me with Mark, with Joe Olderman, and apparently with a couple of other guys as well. I don't know how many, and I don't give a damn. For months, if not years, you've been playing the whore with other men, giving them everything I beg you for, doing all the things with them that you would never do for your loving husband, despite all my requests. Helen sat frozen on the couch, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't even try to defend herself anymore. She looked utterly defeated. "Here's the thing that really gets me," I said, my voice icy. "You love me. I know you love me. We've looked forward to growing old together, and I know you meant it. Well, guess what? That's your punishment. You don't get to grow old with me. You don't get to live with me anymore, to see me every day, to snuggle in bed with me at night. You don't even get to live in this house anymore." I pointed to 3 suitcases standing in the corner. "In 5 minutes, you'll be putting those in your car and driving away, Helen, and you're not coming back." She cried out then, startling me. "No, Rob, no, baby, you." "Yes, baby, I can," I said savagely. "And I will. I'm throwing you out. But first, a couple of little details." I moved toward her until I was standing just in front of her on the couch, towering over her. She shrank back in fear, watching me. I pulled my wedding ring off and dropped it into her lap. Her eyes widened in surprise as I grabbed her left hand and pulled her wedding and engagement rings off. The wedding band I also dropped into her lap, but I put the engagement ring into my pocket. The engagement ring was my grandmother's. As you know, that stays with me. The wedding rings we gave each other, you can do whatever the hell you want with them. Melt them down, throw them away, shove them up your ass. They stood for our love and fidelity to one another, and we both know what that's worth now. I moved to the coffee table and picked up a beautiful glass vase, mostly clear, but shining with bright blue and green highlights. "Remember this, Helen, from Venice. The 5th anniversary gift we bought each other. It was really too expensive, but we both loved it, and it kind of became a symbol of how precious we were to each other." I raised my arms high and threw the vase to the floor with all my strength. Helen cried out in pain as it shattered into tiny pieces. "Not worth keeping anymore," I said coldly. Turning to the fireplace, I picked up 2 photo albums and tossed them into the hearth. Our wedding album and our family album. All the precious pictures, all the memories of what we had meant to each other. No need for them now, right, Helen? I bent and poured lighter fluid over the books, then struck a kitchen match and set them alight. Helen lurched suddenly toward the fireplace, crying out, "No." But I grabbed her around the waist and pulled her back to the couch, where she collapsed, sobbing. We both watched the flames consume the albums, and I gently patted the pocket where I'd put the pictures of our daughters that I had rescued from the family book. My memories of the girls were still precious to me. In a couple of minutes, both books were ashes. Helen was still sobbing, her face turned away from me. "Okay, Helen, that's it," I said briskly, clapping my hands. "Show's over, and it's time for you to go." When she didn't move, I grasped her arm firmly and pulled her to her feet, leading her toward the front door. "Wait, Rob, wait," she said, struggling to free herself. "You can't just throw me out of here." "Actually, I can, Helen, and I'm going to." Her face showed her pain and her fear. Without a word from me, without letting me explain what happened, I stepped back, looking at her for a long, silent moment. "Helen, do you really believe there's anything you can say? Any possible explanation you can give that will ease my pain and hurt? Anything that will make your cheating, your total betrayal, and humiliation of me more bearable? Anything at all that can make this better or less awful?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking utterly defeated. After a long moment, she said, "But what about the girls? I drove to see Linda and Veronica over the weekend. They both know about your cheating and that I'm divorcing you." At that, she cried out and collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood watching her for a few moments, my beloved wife, the mother of my children, my life partner, and best friend for a quarter of a century. Then I left her there on the floor in the front hall while I loaded her suitcases into the trunk of her car. When I came back inside, she was sitting, hollow-eyed, looking at nothing. Without a word, I pulled her to her feet and walked her outside to the car. The key was sitting on top of it, and I left her standing by the driver's side door. I contemplated the right parting words, but nothing came to mind. "Goodbye, Helen," seemed a bit insufficient for the situation, and "screw you, you cheating whore," a bit unoriginal. So I just left her there. I went back into the house and locked the door behind me. Then I stood in the front hall, unmoving, not really thinking, waiting to hear the sound of Helen's car driving away. 7 months later, I was a free man, and a sad one. Free because I was legally divorced. Sad because I was alone in my house. I went into therapy for 3 months and took a vacation after that, trying to rebuild some semblance of my life. All the men I knew who had been in bed with my ex-wife were now single like me, but financially in a mess. Helen, on the other hand, started dating a man from her office and moved in with him 2 weeks later. That didn't last long. She was back on the street not long after, her new lover apparently unhappy with her past life. I wonder who told him about it. Last I heard, she moved to Alaska. I guess the cold weather might cool her off a bit. I have no intention of dating again anytime soon, and I don't see myself getting married ever again. I'm too drained for that. I love my daughters, and for now, I guess that's all the love I need. I wish I could say I've completely moved on, but some scars don't fade so easily. I still find myself thinking back to everything I lost, what I thought my life was supposed to be. Maybe in time, I'll let it all go, but for now, it still feels like I'm carrying the ashes of something I once cherished. At least I know one thing for sure. I'll never let anyone treat me that way again. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.